Okay, so let us start with our continue with our discussion on this modeling of two-dimensional domains by using triangular elements. So we discussed the concept of local coordinates, and we also demonstrated how with the use of local coordinates we can develop the interpolation functions for the nodes corresponding to this triangular geometry very easily by using Lagrange's interpolation formula, and that makes it very easy to construct interpolation without going through the first principles and using developing the interpolation functions by using PC inverse that requires the inversion of coordinate matrix. Using these local coordinates, these are very easily done, and similar analog is using the local coordinates are also is also available for the three-dimensional analog, that is a four-noded tetrahedron for the linear model, and then with mid-side nodes on all edges, that will be quadratic model for tetrahedron higher order family. So we move ahead, and as we saw the L1, L2, L3, the local coordinates, they are given by uh, the ratio of the area in case of triangular elements, and they would be given by the ratio of volume in case of tetrahedron elements, the way they divide the domain into respective parts. And they would all add up to unity, which is the essential requirement of interpolation functions. Uh, that sum of all interpolation functions of the element, they should all add up to unity. That is a requirement to allow rigid body mode of displacement. So the field variable of primary variable within the constant strain triangle element is given by sigma Li ui, I ranging from 1 to 3, that's a standard result, and Li is identical with Ni that we derived using the first principles by polynomial approximation as well. And for higher order interpolation, the approximation can be developed by using Lagrangian interpolation formula that we discussed in our last lecture. And N1, the interpolation function for first node, is given by L1 multiplied by twice L1 minus 1, and 2 is equal to L2 multiplied by twice L2 minus 1, and so on. The mid-side nodes are given by L1, L2, and then normalized to have unit value at node 4 and node 5 and node 6 similarly. Now, the integration is very interesting because that is where we actually have problem with triangular elements. The integration in a triangular region, the problem with the Cartesian coordinates and triangular regions is that the domain, the coordinate value keeps on changing. So that requires somehow you need to change the limits, and I am sure you must recall, you may be able to recall the difficult time we all faced while evaluating integrals in Cartesian coordinate variables, integrand in Cartesian coordinate variables, and the integral is to be evaluated over domains which are not aligned with the Cartesian coordinates. So the one variable needs to be changed in terms of another variable, and then the integral has to be evaluated for the remaining variable through the entire range. And sometimes explicit inversion may not be possible. For example, it may not always be possible to express y in terms of x and then uh, express the limits of y also in terms of limits of x, and then it becomes easier to evaluate. But that is sometimes not always possible, and then the numerical integration is the only recourse. We make use of quadrature rules that we already discussed earlier, sample the integrand at different points throughout the domain, multiply it with some weighting coefficient associated with it, that sampling point, and accumulate the sum, and that would be approximately equal to the desired integrand. But there are certain closed form expressions available for integration of triangular domains. And for example, if the integral is of the form x raised to the power m and multiplied by y raised to the power n and integrated over the triangular area, then there are certain standard results available, and some of those most commonly encountered results are, if it's a constant integration, then it's a no-brainer. It's a double integral dx dy is simply going to be equal to the area of triangle, and that is what I00 is equal to area of triangle. And I10, if x is appears as power 1 and y power is 0, then it is again no-brainer. It's a moment of area, and that's how you get the integral as area of triangle multiplied by the distance of the centroid. X hat is the distance coordinate of the centroid. And similarly, I01 is delta multiplied by y hat, that's the coordinate of the centroid. And then increasing higher order terms, we get another set of results. So these are the integrands. I mean, normally you would encounter this kind of integrals when you develop that weak form and try to evaluate that integral. And we can make use of these results. And of particular interest is the constant strain triangle. The domain integral is going to be constant, and it is only equal to simply the area of triangle, and that makes the use of constant strain triangle or constant strain pyramid in case of volumetric, I mean three-dimensional domain, very simple. So you just whatever is the integrand that you have, approximation after substitution of approximation, the integrand is constant, and just multiply it by the area of triangle, and that is usually extended for one order. I mean, it is also representative. If it is one order product, then it is usually we evaluate the integrand at the centroid and multiply it by area of triangle, and that is area of triangle or area volume of pyramid, as the case may be, for 2 and 3 dimensions respectively. So this is a very convenient way of evaluating the integrand, and once we are done with that, we have our algebraic equations, equilibrium equation for the element domain, and rest of the process is carries forward in similar fashion as we discussed for one-dimensional element. Individual elements, element level equilibrium equation, and then move over, accumulate contributions from different elements, and based on common nodes, and the terms would superimpose on each other based on shared degrees of freedom at common nodes, and eventually global system of equations is developed, and subsequent to that the boundary conditions are imposed. So a simple alternative, just as I was mentioned, is to evaluate the integrand at the centroid and then multiply it with the area of triangle to get an approximation of the desired integral. So this one-point quadrature, this is essentially a quadrature rule. So this one-point quadrature is exact for computing stiffness coefficients in the case of constant strain triangle, because the integrand is anyway constant. But it is a reasonably good approximation for higher order terms as well, as long as the element size is small enough, which is what is generally required when you use triangular or pyramid elements. So one point quadrature is adequate to compute the volume of the domain accurately. However, for the calculation of equivalent nodal loads due to body forces, one point quadrature based on the centroid is an approximation because the variation may not be constant. So based centroid will only give you a representative value, but it is a reasonably good approximation, and as long as the element size is small enough, uh, the errors are not of much significance, and they are quite insignificant in the error in approximation. So that's what I mentioned here. The one point quadrature is often used for CST elements because the element size cannot be too large for an acceptable accuracy of finite element analysis. So because the strain is constant all over the domain, so obviously it cannot be used to model a large amount part of the domain. So the nature of the element requires that for a reasonably good analysis, representative analysis of the problem, the element size has to be reasonably small. And for that small element size, the one point quadrature rule is generally quite adequate. So the boundary integral in the weak form of weighted residual statement, that requires evaluation of integral along a closed path. That we saw that the domain, two-dimensional domain, is enclosed by a curve, and the boundary integral requires integration as one moves along that bounding curve in counterclockwise direction. And the positive sense is the normal pointing outward from the domain. So for simply connected domains, that is like finite elements, where there are no holes or no gaps in between. So that kind of geometry is called simply connected domain. So when we are talking of domain, it is enclosed by a simple straight edge boundaries, right? So this is like a triangle, so bounded by three edges. So this is simply connected domain. Now the normal direction, positive normal direction is considered to be the direction of normal pointing outward from the edge, and we evaluate the integral moving in counterclockwise direction along this boundary of the element. So just as we were discussing about the contribution from two elements, neighboring elements in one-dimensional problem at the common node, the contribution of boundary term is often equal and opposite, and they would cancel out, right? They should be cancelling out by virtue of forming action reaction pair. And the same thing happens here. For example, we have two elements, let's say omega e and omega e plus 1. As we traverse, as we evaluate the boundary integral along the common boundary between these two elements, we will find that as we move from counterclockwise direction in element E, at this common boundary, the positive sense is outward towards the element E plus 1. Similarly, as we traverse this boundary integral in counterclockwise direction in omega E plus 1, the positive sense of this is outside from the element, and these two are uh, equal and opposite. Mechanics wise, they should be equal and opposite. So they cancel each other, and we do not even bother to evaluate these boundary integrals. Right? That is the main point. We do not waste our time and computational resources in evaluating these boundary integrals which are going to be nullified in any way. So we evaluate the boundary integrals only when the element boundary coincides with the problem boundary, right? So there are problem domain, and the domain is divided, discretized by using several finite elements. Now the boundary only on the edges of the element, boundary of the element, which makes a part of the problem boundary, original boundary of the problem, we evaluate these boundary integrals only at those edges. Rest of the edges, it will always be cancelled from the matching contribution from another adjacent element. So there is no need to uh, worry about these integrals. So these boundary integrals are required to be evaluated only on that part of the element boundary that coincides with the boundary of the original problem domain. For the element boundaries in the interior of the domain, these contributions to equivalent nodal forces get cancelled with the contributions coming from the neighboring element sharing the same inter-element boundary, and therefore there is no point in wasting time on that. So how do we evaluate the boundary integrals? So let us say any traction for two-dimensional, they can be resolved in two orthogonal components. One is tangential and one is normal. So let's call tangential to be denoted by shear component tau, and normal to be denoted by normal component sigma n, right? So let's say this edge ij coincides with the problem boundary as well, and integral needs to be evaluated on this ij edge. But how do we evaluate at this ij edge? Because everything is in terms of x and y, and as you can see, this neither x is constant nor y is constant, and both of them are varying on this single line. So how do we evaluate that term in the boundary along the curve along the length of the boundary? So a very simple, it's very straightforward. Uh, I will go by the first principle and explain the entire process, but in practice we can just straight away use the result in applications. So the point is, we define a mapping, it's a coordinate transformation. I define a new coordinate system with origin at I and S direction oriented along from I towards J, the direction in which we are moving for evaluating the boundary integral, and T is the normal perpendicular direction. So what I do here is I define a mapping between x and y to S and T, new coordinate system S and T, which has origin at I. So that is a straightforward representation. There are 2 points I and J, and we have two coordinates x and y, and I and J here. So there are two relations. I can define x is equal to a0 plus a1x plus a1s plus a2t, and y is equal to b0 plus b1s and b2t. And similarly, these are the linear transformations that I can define. And using the coordinates, first of all, placement of the origin relationship, and then the coordinates of these 2 points in xy system and st system. For st system, coordinate of I is 0 0, and coordinate of j is length of this edge and 0, because t coordinate is 0 all along. So once we do that, then the entire expression in terms of x and y can be transformed in terms of s, because t will be substituted as 0 here, right? And then the entire integrand becomes one variable, integrand in one variable, that is s. And then we can evaluate this very one-dimensional integral in terms of s, with s ranging from 0 to length of the edge up to here. So that is the final result, and you can simply use that result by using after resolving the components of the traction in tangential and normal direction, and then evaluate the result appropriately. And once these results are evaluated in S and T coordinate system, they can be always the nodal forces can always be resolved along x and y again before we assemble them into the global system of equations. And the same process is repeated if these edges are actually coincided, I mean wherever they are. So the process, the local frame of reference, ST frame of reference keeps on changing from edge to edge, and new mapping is defined. So equivalent nodal forces Qx, Qy for node I can be obtained by using these direction. These are the direction cosines for resolving those tractions. And Wi is the weighting function in terms of x and y. So eventually this is what it is, and this has to be evaluated over individual elements. So ij, then jk, and then ki as you move along ki, right? And this is what is done after evaluation. In this we represent it as this is qx and qy along the x and y direction. Resolve it along x and y direction. These uh, normal forces and tangential forces, we resolve them along x and y, and then that is what leads us to this. Then x and y can be represented, can be transformed in terms of s and t, and then t is substituted to be 0 in each of these elements, and then we have single variable in terms of s ranging from 0 to length of the element, right? So evaluation of these integrals is simplified if we consider a transformation of variables in xy coordinate system to a new coordinate system st with origin at node I. Let's look at how things work at node I. So these two coordinate systems are related by this simple linear transformation. X is equal to a0 plus a1s plus a2t, and y is equal to b0 plus a1s b1s plus b2t. Assuming the length of the side ij as hij, nodes I and j are identified in st coordinate system by the coordinates 0, 0, and hij length of the element along ij edge, and 0, that's the t coordinate. And let us say there is another third node that is defined by it has the coordinates sk and tk. So once we have all that, then we have mapping between three nodes of the triangle vertices in xy coordinate system and st coordinate system. And once we have that, it is a triangular lower triangular matrix, and this can be solved very easily, like I mean forward elimination. So first solve for a0, that would be same as xi. Then knowing a0, we solve for a1, that would be xj minus xi divided by hij, and knowing a0 and a1, we solve for a2. And similarly, uh, we follow the same process for b0, b1, and b2. Right? So since the side ij is defined by t is equal to 0, in the new st coordinate system we can just substitute x is equal to a0 plus a1s, uh, and t is of course 0, so that term drops out, and y0 is equal to b0 plus b1s, and that's all in the integrand, and that is a single variable variation, and that can be evaluated in terms of s, as s varies from 0 to hij, and this process we repeat for all the edges of the element wherever the integral has to be evaluated. So with these substitutions, the weighting functions that we have, if we substitute them, then they become a one-dimensional interpolation function that you may recall. This is same as one-dimensional interpolation function, Lagrangian interpolation function, if you may. So This can be evaluated very in a straightforward manner, and the results for boundary integrals can be computed and substituted in the governing differential equation, uh, governing equilibrium equations for the element, algebraic equations of the element, which represent the governing differential equation of the problem. So the weighting function for the node k is 0 because node k receives no contribution to the equivalent nodal load due to edge tractions along ij. So third node, the weighting function corresponding to the third node doesn't really contribute. Similarly, for when we are looking at edge jk, then weighting function corresponding to node I would vanish in terms of st coordinate system. So essentially we look at only the two elements, two nodes of the edge at in the linear triangle. For quadratic triangle, we will look at all the three nodes on that edge, and that will be a quadratic function instead of linear function of s, as in the case of constant strain triangle here. So that's what I was mentioning. For higher order elements, the required weighting function are given by one-dimensional Lagrangian interpolation functions for the nodes located on the side under consideration. So that's the end result, and that is how we develop the computer codes. We just use this end result, and for boundary integral, we just make use of one-dimensional Lagrangian interpolation and evaluate the integrand accordingly. So with that, we complete our discussion on triangular family of elements. So if you want to discuss anything, any questions, we can take it up. Otherwise, I will move on to the discussion on rectangular elements. Any questions? Okay, fine. So just as we used triangular elements, that as that I mentioned, that the triangular geometry is the simplest geometry which can enclose an area, and therefore they are the natural choice for use as finite element shapes in two-dimensional geometry, and its analog is a pyramid uh, in three-dimensional domains. And these were the early finite elements to have been developed, and they performed exceptionally well in preliminary results, preliminary investigations, and that's how from there the entire theory of finite element subsequently developed. Eventually, it was found that it was realized, I mean, fine, triangle is fine, but we can reduce the computational effort by using rectangular element, and whatever effort is required in case of using triangular domain to represent that much area, we can do with less computational effort by using rectangular elements. And further, rectangular elements are easier to deal with in Cartesian coordinates. The interpolation models are easily developed using Lagrangian interpolation model, and also other interpolation model that we will discuss in a short while. So, and it comes naturally. The Cartesian coordinate system adopts rectangular geometry very naturally. So they can be used to develop models and develop the finite element mesh very in a convenient fashion, and data preparation also becomes much simpler in rectangular geometry. So a rectangular element can be used to model an area that would require two triangular elements and thus result in considerable economy in formulation of element level equations. So rectangular elements can be divided into two categories depending on the way interpolation functions are constructed, and that is the bottom line. We have studied almost all that there is for as far as the finite element concept is concerned. Now you should be able to relate with the fact that all that we are doing here now is define domains, subdomains or element shapes, and define its the way the interpolation functions of those for those sub domains or element shapes are constructed. Rest of the process is pretty same, pretty much same for as far as the finite element process goes. So for a significant portion of our discussion now, we will be dealing with just the interpolation models, right? And once we know the interpolation model, everything is already uh, there. You just need to plug in the respective interpolation model, and the differential equation can be transformed into algebraic equations. So there are two interpolation families for rectangular elements, and that is referred to as Lagrangian interpolation model and serendipity family. Right? Serendipity is very interesting, and we'll discuss it in a while. Lagrangian family of rectangular elements is obtained by multiplying the one-dimensional Lagrange's interpolation formula. So along two coordinate directions. So we have one-dimensional Lagrange's interpolation along x, and we have one-dimensional Lagrange's interpolation along y, and we multiply the two, and we get an approximation interpolation corresponding interpolation model in terms of x and y. So pretty simple and pretty straightforward, at least to write out the evaluation of the polynomial in this Lagrange's form is of course little problematic, and it's not the most efficient expression of polynomial form, but nevertheless we rarely need to go beyond quadratic or at the most cubic polynomial. So not too much of performance penalty on the point of function evaluation as far as function evaluation is concerned. So rectangular elements of Lagrangian family, so if I do that, then if I see 4-node rectangle, that is the simplest rectangular geometry that I can have, and considering the xy coordinate system to have its origin at the centroid of the element. So the polynomial approximation within the element, obviously there are 4 nodes, so the polynomial approximation field variation should have 4 constants, unknown coefficients, which can be uniquely defined in terms of the constraints imposed at these 4 points, 4 nodes. The primary variable, the displacement variation, field variation within the element has to agree with the value of primary variables at these 4 nodes of interpolation. So whatever interpolation, whatever field variation we have, that has to be described as the interpolation between these 4 values. Right? So interpolation between these 4 values, so 4 constants. So that requires 4-term polynomial interpolation. So that is given by a0 plus a1x plus a2y plus a3xy. So you can see here that the complete polynomial is still first degree. So the convergence characteristics would still be defined by this complete polynomial. This quadratic term is extra, right? So this is an extra term, this is a spurious term that has to be included in order to ensure the unique valued polynomial variation within these 4-node element geometry, right? Otherwise, for the accuracy point of view, this term does not really contribute. The rate of convergence will be decided only on the basis of degree of lowest, uh, what is the highest degree of complete polynomial. So the polynomial approximation is complete only up to the first degree. Two terms of quadratic variation are missing from this term. So we cannot say four node quadrilateral, four node rectangle is complete up to second degree. It is complete only up to first degree variation. So next element is, we just draw the grid lines, and wherever the grid lines intersect, we place a node at that. So when we do that, then we get the nodes at mid side and as well as at the centroid of the element. So we have 9 node Lagrange element, right? So 9 node element will have these four terms. In addition to these four terms, there will be 5 more terms. And what are those 5 more terms? Obviously, they will have quadratic terms, remaining two quadratic terms. So that makes this approximation complete up to second degree. But then we will have uh, two terms coming from cubic variation and one term coming from quartic variation. Now pay attention to the choice of these terms. These are all symmetrically placed in Pascal triangle to ensure the geometric isotropy, to avoid any preferential direction in the uh, element, any preferential coordinate direction. So it really doesn't matter which coordinate axis I call it as x or which coordinate axis I call it as y, the representation is always same. And that is the uh, essential requirement, and that is why the Pascal triangle, the placement of terms is in Pascal triangle is very, very important. The terms that we choose for field variation within the finite element approximation should have terms which are placed symmetrically in the Pascal triangle or Pascal pyramid in case of three-dimensional approximation. So this is complete up to quadratic. All other higher order terms, cubic and quartic, they are spurious just to ensure the provide sufficient degree of freedom to ensure a unique variation using interpolation between 9 nodes of uh, interpolation. The next higher order is simply we subdivide it and go for a finer grid line, and that interaction that would give us 16 node element, right? And those 16 node elements would require not just these 9 nodes, we would add 7 more terms to these 9 terms that we already have, and that would complete variation. So these are the two terms from cubic variation that we already had. So we complete the cubic variation using x cube and y cube, and then we add additional terms from fourth order variation, fourth degree variation, x cube y, x y cube, and then we need to go to fifth order variation, x cube y square and x square y cube, and then one term from sixth order variation, x cube y cube. Again, you can notice that all the terms that we include here, they are always occupying positions, symmetric positions in the Pascal triangle, uh, in the polynomial Pascal triangle of polynomial terms, right? And that is what ensures the geometric isotropy of the problem. So as you can see, Lagrange's element, they require too many interior nodes. For example, for quadratic variation, there is only one interior node, but if I go for cubic variation, there are 4 interior nodes. Now these 4 interior nodes, they do not contribute to inter-element compatibility. So if there is a next element, another element, then these 4 nodes do not in any way affect the compatibility or continuity of the variable, variable of approximation across the inter-element boundaries, right? So that requires, it is unnecessary increase of degrees of freedom, the problem size, and it increases greatly, very, very rapidly. For two-dimensional, we saw from quadratic to third degree, it is the number of variables increase significantly. For three-dimensional, it is even much more rapid. So Lagrangian, that is a general trend. Lagrangian elements require a large number of internal nodes, and that is happening because we are expressing Lagrangian interpolation as a cross product of one-dimensional interpolation. So they have to have uh, nodes. The Lagrangian interpolation model, they have to have nodes wherever the one-dimensional integrations, one-dimensional interpolation nodes, they intersect each other at the grid points. So for higher order approximation, they would require very large number of uh, incomplete polynomial terms, because there are large number of internal nodes. So we need to include larger number of higher order terms which do not contribute towards the accuracy of the solution. So they are actually polluting the solution, and as we saw in the interpolation approximation of Run's function, higher degree interpolation does not necessarily solve the problem. It is not always a good approach to interpolate, to use a higher degree interpolation, uh, very high degree polynomial interpolation to approximate. There can be unpleasant surprises that may be lurking in between the variation between the nodes. So the number of extraneous incomplete polynomial terms increase with degree of interpolation, and that is actually a matter of concern. And with this, the second family of interpolation model, that is serendipity family, was developed. The number of internal nodes grows rapidly with the increasing order of interpolation. Since these internal nodes do not contribute to the inter-element C0 continuity of the primary variables, those are often condensed out of element level equations before assembling in the global system of equations, so that the final assembly needs to deal with a smaller problem size. Otherwise, the problem size would increase to prohibitive levels to limit the number of unknowns to be solved for. So that led to the development of this serendipity family. Serendipity family is named after a folklore. It's not a folklore, it's a historical fact. The princes of a region called Serendip in Sri Lanka. So they were often credited with making accidental discoveries, happy discoveries. They were set out to do something, but in the process they would discover something which was useful, but it was not really what they were actually looking for. So then these happy accidental chance discoveries, that phenomena is now referred to as the serendipity family. Serendipity. So serendipity family, we that was developed as a because the interpolation functions were often uh, developed by using trial and error to begin with in the beginning. Now, of course, we have a very well defined rational process of developing interpolation functions for serendipity family, and particularly when we rarely need to go beyond quadratic variation, at most cubic variation that we will go for finite element approximation. So it is the process is very logical now, and what is the idea is the intention was we need to develop finite elements with fewer interior nodes, and there was a possibility because the if we look at it, uh, 8 nodes that we have in case of if we look consider mid-side nodes on the edges of the rectangle, there are still two adding extra terms than what is required for complete quadratic polynomial. Complete quadratic polynomial requires only 6 terms, isn't it? So constant term, linear in x, linear in y, x square, xy, and xy square. So a total of 6 terms. And if we place the mid-side nodes, then we have total number of 8 nodes here. So there should be a possibility to have complete quadratic variation while meeting all the requirements of the shape function interpolation, finite element interpolation model. And that's how the entire process of trial and error was developed. I mean, people kept on working out what are the possibilities, and they hit on the correct combination of these 8 node quadratic element for serendipity family. And similarly for cubic variation, we just place these on the 1/3 points, these nodes, and we can have 12 terms. So that is again 12 nodes, that is again larger than the minimum number of terms required for complete cubic variation. So it should be possible to have these complete quadratic and complete cubic variation with fewer number of nodes and fewer number of extraneous terms. And moreover, this eliminates the interior nodes which do not in any way contribute to inter-element compatibility of the approximation. So, and remember, all this is happening in 1970s when computer storage and computer storage was at a premium, and computer memory, the processor capabilities were quite limited, and the computer high-speed memory for computation was also very small. So it made a lot of difference to reduce the problem size. Small savings actually made a lot of difference whether you could solve a problem or you could not solve a problem. A more efficient approach is of course to consider the rectangular elements. This is in comparison with the Lagrange's element, which have several interior nodes and spurious terms. So a more efficient approach is to consider Lagrange's rectangular elements with no or a minimum number of internal nodes, and those are referred to as serendipity elements. Serendipity because the name is borrowed from chance discovery of interpolation functions for these elements, because the simple grid, one-dimensional interpolation model multiplying each other, that doesn't work in case of serendipity element. So polynomial variation of the field approximation may be given again. Choose symmetric terms. So for 4-node rectangle, both elements are same, Lagrange's and serendipity elements are same. For 8-node element, we stop at 2 cubic terms or beyond the complete quadratic. For 12-node elements, we add 2 quartic terms beyond the complete cubic. So very uh, significant saving. For example, for this cubic element, we are reducing 4 nodes. We are eliminating 4 nodes, and 4 nodes, that means we are reducing 8 variables in one element. right? And in the global assembly that will add up to very large number, because these 8 uh, variables, they would be, they would not be common with any other element, so they would still be adding up, they would be directly adding up to the problem size directly. So that's a considerable saving. And earlier the appropriate interpolation functions for such elements could only be found by trial and error, and hence the name serendipity. A logical process is now available and to determine the required shape function. So let us look at the process for 8-node element. 4-node element is of course identical with 4-node bilinear element of the Lagrangian family. Bilinear because it is linear in x and linear in y. So two linear variations multiplying together. So let us look at the interpolation function. How do we construct interpolation function for 8-node rectangle element? We use this technique for developing the interpolation functions for 6-node triangle also in our last lecture. So let us look at this variation. So two XY coordinate system with origin at the centroid, and there are 8 nodes numbered like in counterclockwise order 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 vertices, and then the mid-side nodes 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's say the length is 2a and width is 2b. So this is the interpolation function for node n5, for node 5. So node 5, it should vanish at, variation should vanish at this edge, it should vanish at this edge, it should vanish at this edge, and it should be unity at node 5. So this is the variation of n5, so interpolation function corresponding to node 5. So how do we get this interpolation function? That's pretty simple. We just look at the same concept, 0 of this line, so that will ensure that the variation vanishes at this point, this all 3 nodes, multiplied by 0 of this line, so that would ensure that the variation would vanish at these 3 nodes, and then multiply by 0 of this line, equation of this line, right? So 0 of a line is same as is the same thing as the equation of the line. So once we multiply with this, then the vanishing condition at all these nodes except node 5 is satisfied. And then we evaluate it, this product of 3 equations, equation of lines, we evaluate it at node 5. And whatever is the result, we just normalize it with that and to get unit value. Right, so that is how we have. So we have node 5 here, and similarly we can develop the equation for node 8. So the interpolation function for node 8 is given like is just another view of that. And we can also have interpolation function for 4 node rectangle, the bilinear interpolation function for node 1. So that looks like this. So I am referring to this as n1 hat. So that's a bilinear variation, linear with respect to x, linear with respect to y, and it takes unit value at node 1 and goes linearly to 0 at other nodes, and at these edges it remains 0. Right? So what is the value of this n1 hat at midpoint? It will be half on this edge, and it will be half on this edge as well. So what I do here is I need to bring it down to 0 at this point. I need to bring this down to 0 at this point. So what I can do is, because n5 and n8 anyway do not have any contribution at the other nodes. So I can just subtract half of n5 from n1 hat and half of n8 from n1 hat, and that will take care of the required representation. And when I do that, So n1 hat minus half of n5 minus half of n8, it gives me this variation which meets the requirement. So this vanishes at node 5, node 8 as well, and this one vanishes at node 5 as well. And it has, by virtue of these n5 and n8 which are quadratic, so this also has now quadratic variation. So this is how the interpolation functions for serendipity family are generated. So we consider develop the interpolation function for mid-side node, which can be developed by using the zeros of other edges and then normalize to have unity at respective nodes, and then subtract required amount of contribution from bilinear interpolation for the corner nodes. So first develop the interpolation for mid-side nodes and then modify the bilinear interpolation of corner nodes of 4-node rectangle. And that's how we get the interpolation models, interpolation functions for 8-node rectangular serendipity elements. Similarly, construction of interpolation function for the 12-node bicubic element multiplied by the equation of lines. So this is the geometry of these three 12-node elements. So again n5 and n7, we have these interpolation models, and we can develop the interpolation n1 as bilinear interpolation n1 minus 2/3 of n5 plus n12. So these are the two interpolations that will have 2/3 weightage, and minus 1/3 of n6 and n11 for subtraction, and that is what gives us this n1 interpolation, and similarly for the other corner nodes. So that way procedure is quite standard now, and you don't really need to go beyond bicubic variation in any case. We don't we have seen the problems of using very high degree interpolation, and any arbitrary curve, as long as it is modeled in a small enough region, can be represented reasonably well by a lower degree polynomial. So a cubic variation is generally more than enough. Normally we do not even go beyond quadratic variation. So most of the time you will be using either quadratic finite elements or just linear finite elements. So I will stop here. Any questions?